Welcome. Huge welcome to today's debate, Regenerate Architecture, and a huge welcome to my co-panelists, Peter Mørk and Nikolaj Svejstrup. A huge welcome to those of you who are with us from afar. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening. And a huge welcome to those of you who are with us physically at BLOXHUB today. It is a huge pleasure to have you here with us. My name is Pernille Berg. I'm Science Director at BLOXHUB. And for those of you who've not been with us before, BLOXHUB and Copenhagen Institute of Futures Studies have set the ambitious agenda of an exploration of a regenerative world and a reimagination of our cities during this autumn with a series of events, debates, and as a campaign, as Nikolaj also says. We're looking at a future where our cities will be larger and more complex than today, presenting global challenges, a plethora of these, and also opportunities for the 21st century. Among the major changes taking place are demographic shifts, technological development, environmental threats, economic growth, economic degrowth, and inequality, or equality, depending on the perspective, as well as political uncertainty. Today, cities represent an emerging global governing power, crucial to addressing and solving some of the world's most pressing issues. This puts cities on the forefront of a regenerative transformation. Today, we're looking at architecture and the role of architecture when it comes to regenerative cities. Why architecture? Apart from the almost banal knowledge of this point, because it's reiterated by so many and so far, but we spend 90% of our lives indoors, and architecture form and shape lives. But it's also because today is Architecture Day. Allow me to dwell just a little bit on this. World Architecture Day is celebrated every first Monday of October to appreciate the great architectural works of the ancient and modern worlds and the superb, brilliant people who designed them. Also, to stay updated throughout what goes on in architectural engineering. If we look at the history of the architecture and that we're celebrating it, it's also the history of humankind. They're interlinked. With successive changes in architecture comes development in our culture, tradition, commerce, technology, and intellectuality. I will not take you through the history of architecture. I do have it in my notes, but I'll spare you. But if I say the pyramids that have lasted for so long, and going to the classic period with the rise of the ancient Greece and the Roman architecture, which dominated architectural style for centuries, moving on to postmodernism as an architectural style that quickly gained acceptance in the 21st century. And then we have the World Architecture Day, reminding the world of its responsibility to the future of the human habitat. That's one thing that we're celebrating today. We're also celebrating, or the launch of Copenhagen as World Architecture, the capital of World Architecture. World Capital of Architecture, it has many ways. Let's say WCA, that's also today. So we have Copenhagen in common, that's also being launched today. But what we want to do in this debate today is to focus on the regenerative of architecture and what is regenerative architecture. And to do that, I've aligned myself with two wonderful people. I've also researched a little bit on you guys, apart from the banter that some of us witnessed prior to this more serious aspect of today's debate. Peter Mørk, I'll call you innovator and creator. Yes?
Fine.
Yes. And one of the many things that you do is actually ensuring the creative companies, their internationalization, and how to create synergies with other sectors. And you work with strategy and commercialization, and you do it at a global scale. You have an extensive network. That's why I've also invited you, begged you to come here today to share some of that perspectives and your view on what is going on in the world. And you actually specialize in helping architectural, urban and design companies with business development. You're also the initiator and promoter of a lot of promotion activities, including Denmark's first Architectural Week, which is why I thought it would only be right to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Then we have Nikolaj Svejstrup, Associate Partner of Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies, thus partner in crime of this campaign and series. What you also focus on is emphasizing that the cities of the future will be radically different from those of today, which I'm, of course, very curious to hear much more about today. You also have a large and broad knowledge of megatrends in urban development, and you have for many years had a focus on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. You have a passion for, apart from sustainable regenerative urban development, including construction in wood, I read, you lead development projects to promote the bioeconomic economy. And you have a passion for bonfires. And what I learned earlier is who ends up in the bonfire? Peter. So I think this is a perfect match to dive into the regenerative architecture. BLOXHUB, where I'm from, we like to invite and engage in our community and in focusing on some of the challenges and opportunities addressing the urban development. We're based both with companies, organizations, and research institutions because we believe that the topics we're addressing requires consilience, cross-disciplinary collaboration, where we are addressing them together, because only by addressing them together can we create solutions where we can all see ourselves in the future of our urban development. So thank you guys for joining me, and apologies for a bit of a long introduction today, but I thought it was worthwhile. For those of you who are with us, please just ask and comment in the chat, because we will include you in the debate. And you guys that are with us physically, just raise your hands when you want to provoke, challenge, or want the wonderful guys with me to elaborate a little about some of the cliffhangers that I'm sure that they are going to raise today. So, without further ado, thank you again. Thank you for being with me here today.
Thank you.
And in our pre-talk about today, I basically raised some pressures or challenges of transitioning that the architects are facing today. We know that we have Danish architecture companies looking into their business models, but also we heard earlier this summer, one of our leading architects, Lena Tranberg, actually write, have we done the right thing? Have we actually created the right type of architecture? Which created a cascade of comments. So that kind of pressure of transformation, I think, is interesting to look at, and I know that you have some comments to that. But before that, it kind of begs when Lena says, have we done the right thing? Question mark. Implicitly saying maybe we haven't. Then what is the right thing when it comes to the regenerative architecture? In other words, what is regenerative architecture?
Well, thank you, Pernille, and thank you very much for inviting us for this debate. I think you're asking two questions when you ask what is regenerative architecture, because today we're really going to talk a lot about what is regenerative, but for me it's also what is architecture, because as you said in your nice introduction, the way we have thought of architecture is this human habitat. And the things that we are talking a lot of today is how do we live better in balance with the nature. So it's not only the human habitat we're talking about, it's the global habitat where we're going to live together with all the other species on this planet, which we are not so good at. As you said, that we also from the Copenhagen Institute for Futures Studies wants to explore this. So I'm sure that we're going to have a lot of answers for you today, but we're not going to have the answer, because one of the most important things of making the future, be inspired by the future, is trying to explore what is going on. So that's what we want to make this, as you said, I call it a campaign, because I want to spread it out, this discussion. We want to get more people involved in this new way of thinking, because it is a new way of thinking. We have to demolish all the way the way we used to think architecture and all the other things we're doing, because all this about regenerate is to, for me, it's to how to do better, not doing something a little bit bad. Here in Denmark, we have this a lot of discussion about how we can have a new goal for how many CO2 emissions we have. Then we make a 70% goal. It's just doing things a little bit not so bad, but in my words, we have to think of how do we do it better, and we don't have all the answers yet. But we are trying to explore it, and we're trying to get into the new set of words, the new set of thinking, the new set of mindset. So for me, architecture and regenerative architecture is to make this, to think in a more holistic way, to think that we are a part of the planet. We're all talking a lot of planetary boundaries at the moment. This is also why we have made this nice logo. If some of you can see it, we are trying to illustrate that we're focusing into how do we live inside make a balance, so we respect the planetary boundaries. We're not doing good, friends. I'm sorry to say, but it's very bad. We all know all the fires and the water and everything. Mother Nature is really signing us that we're going the wrong way. And the biggest issue why we're here, I think, and want to do the change, is that if we don't do it now, we really have some bigger problems to look into.
So you answered one part. You said I asked two questions. You answered one part. So I'll let Peter then say, so what is architecture?
I think what Nikolai is saying, architecture should be to improve a building, an area, a community. I think is super important, and that is the way that we should look at architecture. I think we have to go away from designing a building. We have to design more holistically. And together with the environment, and not only environmentally but also socially, it's super important when we talk about cities. How can we regenerate a community? And that is to improve the environment, but also to improve a good city. How can we create the life that we want? And I think architecture is a great part of designing that.
So the regenerative, you're nodding, Nikolai. Is that so? The architecture has a role in designing the good.
To improve, to improve, to make things better.
Yeah.
I think that one of the issues that we are working a lot with in the institute is that the city has a new purpose. We're looking into the city in the future, which is we are going to have a new purpose. We made this report last year during the corona about the new urban purpose, and we are focusing on three things. The one thing is how we live. The city should be where we live, because we don't really have to work there. We don't have to shop there. There was all these technical solutions why we don't, but we really have to live there. So we have to make the cities a place where it's very livable, but also now taking the water, taking the heat, all this, making it possible for us to live there, but also having the focus that in the surroundings, we're also pressing the nature, so we have to give space for nature in the city. So there's a lot of new issues that you should use in the cities, and that's why another capture here is about the focus on how to regenerate. We call it the moonshot in our time in this report. We're very sorry for that, because it should, of course, be called the earth shot of our time. But it's very important that we have this mind shift shifting. So as I said, the third thing we are focusing on is the governance, because who is actually going to do this? Today we talk about architecture. Architects, we get back to that, is one very, very important part of making the change. But the whole society have to think, and of course the people who are making rules, but also govern it in the cities and make all the local areas is very important in this transition.
Yeah, and just now, the topic is architecture, but architecture can, as you also saying, cannot stand alone. I have many good examples of architects who really wants to improve and do a lot of good things, and they make fantastic sketches and they research a lot. But no one wants to pay.
Yeah, so because I think this is a very good time to bring in that aspect.
Yeah.
Because if we look at the current practice or the current pattern modality in the way in which the industry, everyone in part of the construction industry is collaborating to create a building, what is the role of the architect today? We're going from the architecture to the architect. And the role of the architect today is what?
That is to be the creative part. That is what an architect is trained for, to come up with the solutions. And then you're slammed immediately when you finish your drawings because, we cannot afford that. And so you can have the best intentions, but then when the project is finished and perhaps the architect is then let go of because, we couldn't really afford the ideas. And then you might have seen a couple of examples on Danish national TV that then the project ended up completely different than what the architect thought of. So I think the financing and the legislation is super important in the architect's role.
And it goes back to, I was mentioning some of the pressures of transforming is also this, when the architects talk about developing their business model, it is also to get out of this current more particular role and transition into something differently.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the problem is, as we all know, the money, because that's the architects wants, of course, to pay the rent, but also the people who wants to build. The purpose of building is also to earn some money very fast. So that's why we have some good examples for building wood buildings. As you said, I'm also very interested in wood buildings. And we do have a lot of good example of big wood buildings that were going very high, very wide. It's very nice buildings and really focusing on CO2 and all the emissions and so on. But the many things, the main things is still going all the wrong way, all the old way. If you see here in Copenhagen, a lot of the new areas is, of course, there's good examples, and we all focus on these small examples. But the many is just racing very fast in the good old days, bad way.
Yeah.
And we're good at it in Copenhagen.
Yeah, we're good.
Meaning that, and we talked about this a bit before, that having said that, and I have to praise Denmark and the Nordics, we are actually quite concerned, and we have ambitions, and that differs a lot from area to area around the world.
Yeah. Because we had some quite well-renowned architectural companies just publishing in collaboration with some research institutions the reduction roadmap, where they are actually illustrating that we need to reduce the current practice of CO2 emissions by 96%.
Yeah.
So there are a lot within the Danish architectural world that are highlighting the need for a transition to a different way of constructing.
And you're right about that, a completely different way of constructing. But if legislation does not follow, then it doesn't matter.
But there we do have some good things, because the new legislation, some part of it is coming already here in January. We have to focus on how to see of the life cycles analysis of the materials. We have a top bar for how much CO2 we're going to have for very big buildings, and in 25 we're going to also have it for small buildings. So we do have a lot of things, and the good things here in Denmark, I think, is that this initiative, the reason that why we can put it in the legislation is that it's coming from beneath, is people, is the industry got to go together, work out how could we do this, and because the government could see, okay, it could actually work this. We could also put it in the legislation.
And do you see an industry that is ready to actually apply and fulfill the requirements of this new legislation coming into play in Denmark by the 1st of January?
Ooh.
That's a good question.
That's a very good question,
No, I don't think so. But they have to.
Yes.
And I'm tempted to say, and that was why I started by saying legislation, because that's the only thing that works. Going back, going back to an initiatives, incentives as well. But going back to one of our greatest successes in Denmark is the wind energy. That was invented during the oil crisis, and we had a very, very tough energy legislation. We had to innovate, and that's the same. When we change the law, that's what happens. Now we can just hope that the rest of the world is also changing their laws.
The good thing when you said, okay, everybody have to incorporate this LCA analysis in the buildings. And a lot of people say, oh, wait, we cannot do that. A lot of the people who make the materials, who should make the analysis and say, what is this? They say, oh, wait, we cannot do that. But if you cannot do that, if you don't know what is in your product and what it contains and what the problems is with it, you shouldn't make that project. So my hope is that we're just gonna make a line and say, okay, everybody who's really want to do the change, they will also fulfill all these goals of making this analysis. The problem is, so on the other side, when the architects have to choose between them, because you just have to make an LCA. But if it's good or bad, it's the one on the other side who should decide if you should use that product. It could be a bad LCA, but still it's a LCA. So that's fulfill that kind of that side of the problem. But the other side is who wants to gonna say, okay, I choose this material before that material. That's one thing. The other thing that I'm thinking of really going to change how our buildings and cities going to look like is that this top of CO2 amount you can have in a building will have this. The architects really going to look into what kind of materials can we use. Today we use a lot of glass. We use a lot of aluminum.
Aluminum.
Aluminum. That's why we shouldn't have it.
Yes.
No, but all these things that's very CO2 heavy, and you can see it in all our buildings coming up. And if you want to make a house with only 2, 3, 4, 5 kilo per square meter, then you cannot use these things. So we're going to see different types of buildings coming up. I think very few years.
That's a good thing.
You agree? You don't have to agree.
I agree domestically. I agree here. I do not know where other countries are ambitiously. I can just say that, and I stated that we are actually doing quite well. Many of our architects in Denmark compared to architects in other parts of the world. So I really hope that we take this seriously in the rest of the world as well.
But it's also one of the challenges because we don't do a lot of stuff here in Denmark. So many of the materials is coming from all over the world. I mean, I just spoke with one the other day and said that the straw roof for his house at Ulfshale at Marine, where the straw is just outside the window. I don't know what a Tickerman is called in English, but the man who makes the roof said, it's much cheaper and it's much better if we import it from Japan. So what? I mean, then we're going to have this, we're talking about these natural products that's going into nature, can go back to nature. It's part of the regenerative thing. But the thinking is that if you, the market is global. And we really, all this crisis we have at the moment, of course, shows this very much. The prices are rising, the war in Ukraine and so on. But it's also saying, okay, is this the right way to do it?
Yeah, because it goes back to some of the things that you opened up by saying, Nikolai, that this is actually a change. It's a mind shift, which we addressed in our last debate in terms of the motivation and how to deal with this from a psychological point of view. And I still kind of like to probe also, because you've both traveled the world quite extensively. Do you find that our role as architects, based on the Danish tradition as the architect, are they ready for that change, that shift? You've highlighted that we have a growing awareness, there is momentum within the Danish industry, but do they know to the extent that you would like them to know about materials, for example? And it's an open question. I'm not the expert, but given your travels and all the programs that you've done, Peter, where do you see us as a kind of ready to go?
Okay, now it's going to be a bit of advertising because
it's allowed.
Yeah. As a part of the Nordic countries, or the Nordic model, is very sought after worldwide.
And why is that?
I started up by saying, that the regenerative cities is not only about environment, but it's also about the social and cultural issues. And we're actually quite good at that. We are quite good at creating communities, and our society model in the Nordic countries are very thought after. Now, in the very, very big picture, there's something new we call it corona tourism. That means that we're seeing that the Nordic countries attract a lot of tourists from around the world because it's safe to be here. We have safe cities. We have Copenhagen works really, really well. The other Nordic cities works really well as well. That model works. So if an architect, a Danish architect, comes to North America, they want a bit of that Nordic. So we have definitely a competitive advantage, also environmentally, because we're further ahead than many other continents. A long answer, but we're doing what we're doing.
It's always nice to get some praise.
Yeah. But we're doing well, and having said that, and then we have sometimes I have told Danish architects that we unfortunately have to be careful of not being too ambitious when we approach the North American market, but because they simply do not have a clue of what we're talking about.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
For instance, circular economy. When I started talking to some developers in Canada about circular economy, they were not there. That was not a language that they understood at that time. In North America, they are doing a lot. Again, North America is huge. In California, they're very, very ambitious. In other parts of the US, they're perhaps not the exact same. But they have a tendency of solving, and I would say that's also from Asia, solving many of our environmental issues with technology. Not necessarily just creativity about turning windows or making the facade in a different material, but technology. So I've often experienced that we are fantastic. We've saved a lot on aircon, but perhaps we could do a building without aircon.
And please, again, if you have questions or comments, just let us know.
Yeah.
Because one thing that I'm also tempted to ask is that we're very good, because the Nordic countries also have a higher degree of homogeneity. And there is a long tradition of public infrastructure in terms of pushing an agenda as well. We've seen this, for example, with the windmill energy. There was invested an amazing amount of money in research and also subsidies in order to then commercialize said research knowledge. But one of the things that I would like to ask is as I open with the plethora and the polycrisis that we're facing, we're talking about cities around the world that will double their population within the next decade. It's a scale that we are not accustomed to. We can do we can do an experiment, a test, a demonstrator, and then start working with the solutions, i.e. bio-based materials. But we have other parts of the world, not that far from the Nordic countries, where they have to transition and scale the solutions immediately. And are we ready to participate in that transformation, given back to the topic, regenerate now?
No.
And why not?
I think that when I'm thinking of this issue, that if the rest of the world were doing the same way as we are doing, well, the total amount of pollution would go crazy, and the world would go under very fast. So if we want to go out in the world and do some change, we really have to think of what we're bringing out. We really have to find the real good things to bring out. When I'm also doing the Nordic Pavilion at the COP27 this year in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, and when I got that job, it was normally that the Nordics go out in the world, tell how good we are. We are doing the best things, and now the rest of the world, you have to listen what to do. And then I challenged them. I said, well, do we really think that? Because of this. So now our program for the whole Nordic Pavilion is the solutions we need. So we're going to have all the discussions about carbon capture, Article 6, all the things that we have to discuss at the COP. But my focus is what are the solutions we don't talk about? What are the solutions we need? Because all the things we're doing is not good enough. So it's maybe not regenerative, but it's also trying to make all these people think in another way.
Peter, you're thinking, I can see.
I'm thinking.
Yes.
The light is on, actually.
So I noticed because a follow-up question, I think that's a very honest and reflective point, Nikolai. Because the question then, of course, is, you can almost hear me saying it before I ask it. So for us to be ready to embark on that change, what is needed as an architect? What is it that we need to ensure that we possess in terms of insights, knowledge, and skills?
Well, I'm sure that today we don't have to focus on what kind of architecture, changes in architecture we should have. We should focus on how do we change the architects. So I totally agree. We have to do this. I know at the schools today, the young people, there are a lot of people with a lot of good ideas and a lot of new thinking. But we also have all the people who make architecture. It's not only architects. There's a lot of people also doing buildings. There's not architects, and all of these have to change their mindsets. If it's a kind of education, and it's a kind of changing the way of we look at this nature life balance as we're really trying to change. Yeah.
And you asked about the Nordic / Danish architecture, and it's perhaps a bit provocating to say, but we have around 700 architectural practices in Denmark. Around 50 of them are international or works internationally. And then you can cut them down to 20 who sort of works overseas. So the question, no, we're not ready at all. We have some good examples, and we have a very few bigger architectural practices who are working very international. But that's really it. This is a test lab in Copenhagen from the big scale, and that's what we can do. And then we can build on that, and we can hopefully make some alliances with other good architects around the world.
That's an interesting point. Nikolai, you also...
It's just because there's a lot of different ways to go out in the world. Of course, we have these 20 very good, very exciting big architecture firms. But next year, the whole world's architects are coming here. So my challenge is that why don't the UIA, why don't we say to this UIA Congress, when all the architects are coming here, you don't go home from here without having a new mindset, trying to learn this, and then we should use the next half year or what is left to find out what are we going to tell them. I know they are working very hard of a different kind of science tracks and so on, but why don't they make a declaration that they all should sign before they go home? Then we can change most of the world.
But you have architects declare. As we have
they do things like that. Yeah. And the whole focus on the Congress is SDGs, and so they're on the right way. It's not a critical, but it's saying, okay, we have all the architects here. Why don't we?
But I can see Peter taking all the architects to living places, which will be done by next year, right?
To living places. What do you mean?
It's the demonstration project, and going back to your test lab. Copenhagen is the test lab.
Exactly.
And effect. Looks creating.
Exactly. And that is good. Obviously, to show what we are doing. I agree with Nikolai. It would be fantastic if we could make a worldwide agreement somehow of, now it is the International Organization for Architects who will be here. Having said that, then of course, this ecosystem is just, very different from country to country. So it's easy to say.
Yeah.
But do you have, because just one thing, we all know, or some of us having seen it on the SoMe channels, that the towers of London, they have transitioned the moat around the towers actually to biodiversity. So it's creating energy now and ensuring nature back to the city, as Nikolai was saying. I walked past a place in Copenhagen, for those of you watching, which is with the University of Copenhagen, and they're transitioning a green lawn to another kind of sphere as a meadow. Small pieces of examples. But when you say we're an excellent case study of experiments, can you point to one part of Copenhagen where we have a regenerative example? As you're saying, Nikolai, creating good, adding, not doing less harm, but actually creating, adding, generating.
Yeah, it depends on, if you talk about culture, yes. If you talk about environment, no.
Yeah, but let's get a cultural example. I think it's a very good point to say if we're talking about culture.
No, but I think the way we create areas now is to involve culture. There's this new phrase called creative placemaking, where you involve culture in creating a new area. I think Aarhusgade Nordhavn is a good example of you keep existing buildings and you have as a part of the legislation that you have to have culture, you have to have retail. And you even have facility managers, etc., out there. So we have examples of that also.
So as a community.
As communities, yes, that what works and what doesn't work. So I think we have good examples of that. Nørrebro as well in Copenhagen. But the scary part is that when you asked about environment, no, I don't see that.
Can you think of an example, Nikolai?
Well, I'm trying.
Yes, I can see that. And it's really also just an encouragement.
I think some of the new buildings that are built, which is going to be wooden houses, and that's of course is for the environment. It's wood. It's carbon storage. We have a better indoor life. The climate and so on would be better. So it's also for the people. And when we don't have to use it anymore, we can put it back in the nature and it would do no harm. So some of the wooden buildings, but of course we have not wood enough to build all the things that we want to build. So it's very hard to give one example, but of course some of the things that's rising right now, we don't have so many of them yet, but they are coming. That should be good examples. It's only regenerative if you make this life cycles analysis with them. Of course, they also have to have the energy, but you can do that with some sunroof and so on, and all the greenery. That could also be nice. I think one of the big issues of making a green regenerative city is that we have to focus on the city not as the place we have houses, but the hinterland around the city, because you have to all these things that going into the city. Right now we have a global market. In the old days, good old days, people came from the farmers came into the city, slaughtered the cows, sold the grocery and vegetables, and some of the things got back to the country.
And
we do have
of
some of these systems still.
And some of these trends are actually copying what goes on. So you had farmers market, for example, in New York before you had farmers market in Copenhagen. I'm just teasing you a little bit, because these kind of small examples, and I agree with you, they're very, very good examples, and we need much more of them. But some of the good examples that I also see in Copenhagen, it's actually also based on an inspiration that we get when we're traveling.
This
is fair. This is how it goes. But it's trying to return to the point of scaling, because I think, Peter, you raised a really, really good point in terms of the facts. Facts are quite interesting. That it's only a very small part of the Danish architectural firms today working internationally in terms of also transatlantic and in Asia, for example. And what you were then saying is that, and this is what I've also heard before, so it's not I don't disagree, but that Copenhagen has a size which makes it easy to document the impact created with the various experiments. And then you actually said, so maybe we should start collaborating more internationally.
Yeah.
So following up on that, then what is it that we want to be able to document? What is it that we want to be able to test and show works here, giving the regenerate now? What is it then we want to be able to document?
We historically, we talk a lot about Copenhagen is a city of bikes, a city of good transportation, and a city of design and livability and so on, and that's fine. We have that, but we are not a city of being regenerative environmentally at all. So that have to be our next thing that we concentrate around. We can do much better there. And having said that as well, I actually normally tell Danish architects that we have the best exhibition stand just outside the door here. So we actually don't have to go around the world, but we have to invite the world to here, and that's to BLOXHUB obviously, because there's so much happening here.
And as I can see you're really kind of going through in terms of good examples. But if some of you here have good examples, not necessarily Danish or Nordic.
Oh, but I have.
You have a good example.
Yeah, I have a good example actually from the Netherlands.
Yes.
It's a company that I just started working with. They're called Space and Matter. And they're creating communities on water, self-sufficient, but also the way they construct the floats are with self-cleaning and regenerating sea life. It's a special type of concrete that they use. So not only are they self-sufficient and it becomes one big collab, the houses are made of wood, and people who live there have the right mindset, but they're actually also cleaning the oceans.
It's a good example.
Yeah.
And we have one.
Sorry, this is kind of rewinding back to a different topic. Sorry, I don't have any examples of regenerative anything, unless you're looking at. I think International Living Future Institute is the only body that I know that documents regenerative projects. Sorry. Anyway, rewinding. So I was just at. It was here in Copenhagen, the International Water Association conference. So this is water professionals from all over the world, and they were saying the same two challenges in creating, nature-based regenerative solutions, etc. Well, four things. We know how, we want to, but the problems are it's all about the money, and the legislation is blocking us. So we have cross-disciplinary, massive groups of people who want this. We have 80% of consumers, according to the European Commission, who want to make better, more sustainable choices, etc., etc. We'll call that regenerative.
Let's.
And so how do we, I've been very, very minimally involved in legislative efforts in California, in the US, in a completely different world, but it worked. So my question is how do we all, not only in Denmark, not only in Copenhagen, but worldwide, band together to push the legislation because then that will remove the problem of it's about the money, because then there won't be a choice anymore.
No.
It's a good question.
Yeah. It is a super good question, and if I knew the answer, but I can just see what has happened to many of the Danish sectors when we have had a tough legislation. It gives us competitive advantages, so we can start here, and then we can try to convince other countries to do the same. But we can start. That's what we can do. And we have to do more than what we do today.
And then this is the bottom up, and then you can go the other way around and say, okay, what are Denmark bringing to the COP27 negotiations, or the COP15 about biodiversity in December, or the next these global things that we are always trying to do a little bit better. But when we come to the COP27, we're coming with some money from the Danish government, but also saying, the private sector have to deliver a lot of the money to make the changes. So we should step more in. We should go further and said, okay, if we want this, dear world, we have to do the changes. I think the spirit is there, but the solutions are not there. And then we have all this, who's going to pay, because this global south is saying, all you bad guys up here have done all the damage, so why don't you pay us? That's a very big question, but it's also one of the issues that we're trying to address. How do we solve this, or make a more open dialogue in this?
I'm sorry, I keep on going sort of a bit in circles around. This is a topic that really interests us in Europe or in the Nordics. In other parts of the world, they don't talk about.
But it's emerging, isn't it, Peter?
I completely agree. We just had the whole Trump thing in the U.S., and now finally, something is happening.
You have a movement in London where they are pushing for not demolishing anymore.
Yeah.
So there is an amazing push towards renovating, retrofitting, asking the tough questions in terms of how are we using our resources. There is from other parts of the world an amazing awareness of the climate change, because they experience the effects of climate change much more drastically than we are so far anyway. So one thing is to say that we're ahead, but the other thing is also to look at some of the global trends, which are that there are people that are in that we know how. I've also heard from professionals, we know how. The one thing that this is going back to the talk before we started streaming that I shared with Nikolai and Peter, is that what I also learned from visiting London last week was that we have researchers coming out with a greater understanding of how bio-based materials work. This is a lesson we're also acquiring at home. We have, again, with Christian Wittrup, some of you might know. He's also acquiring this type of knowledge. We know bio-based materials react differently given the climate in which they are used, right? But some of the current standards within the construction industry of water retention, fire hazards, etc., when we're working with bio-based materials, they react differently to water. Not necessarily poorly, but they react differently. And some of this is actually generating a completely different team of collaborators. We had it with Michael Paulin, with biomimicry, but going back to what you're saying, yes, we have a competitive advantage if. Because my question has also been to you guys, are we moving at a pace where we will be ready to collaborate globally with providing the right solutions in the right situation at the right time?
Sorry. Please.
Sorry, so I was at a lecture that was, is it Building Green? I don't know if it was the same person, but I think I really annoyed him because I asked him, how long is it going to take us to get all the results from all of these different combinations that need to be tested? And is there not a body of knowledge somewhere else in the world that we can sort of hurry up and draw from because we need to hurry?
Yeah. And the answer
we'll pass
was
on.
no.
It's a very good question.
Good question. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I think it is tough. I think in general, things have to be speeded up. No doubt about that. It's the same about how do we make political worldwide solutions. It takes too long time. We have to make that process much easier. There's something wrong in the way that we negotiate, to be honest. It takes too long.
Yeah, because this was actually one of my, because of course you've seen some of my questions, and one of my questions to you is actually the road towards the regenerative architecture. We need to accelerate it, but can we also identify it? You've already mentioned money, you've mentioned legislature, but if we look at it positively, as we will, in the spectrum of the regenerative through the lens of the regenerative, then what are the... Can you kind of tease out the journey towards the regenerative architecture, or the architect able to create the regenerative architecture, accelerate it?
Yeah, but I think there's one important thing in this as well is cultural differences, because what we believe is regenerative architecture is not the same they believe in China. I've also, I think you were actually involved in the Shanghai conference. Whew. You know, we were on different islands, understanding, because when they built, they can build a skyscraper in a year, and it goes very fast, and they have the need. They have so many people. So when we start talking about wood, you know, that's not the solution. We need to think completely different, and I'm not sure we have that solution.
That's actually why we are in the Copenhagen Institute for Futures Studies. We are trying to make a program looking into the future, but we don't have the solution. So we want to invite people to come and join as a kind of curse. The curse we can make is, how do we do future thinking? But you have to bring in the thinking, the ways of the new solutions, and then we can make the scenarios. Of course, that's also taking some time, but we have to change the way we are thinking of the end goal. One of my postulates also that we are all talking about this transition. We're all talking about we have to change. But a very few of us is talking about what is the goal, we don't have the picture, the scenario where we want to go. We have to change. We know all the bad things we're doing, but we don't have the picture of where we're going. And I think that's going to be a big issue for us in the Institute, but all in the whole society, to say what is the way we are looking into, what are we going to do? And of course we should do that together. And hopefully that in itself could be some kind of education that could accelerate how you are thinking, how you all are thinking, how you're thinking out there.
And somewhat being the boring person, I'd still like to know the journey is when we get to the train station and we know that we're going to the destination and how many stops on the way. It's sometimes very nice, and we also learned at the debate only a few weeks ago that from a psychological point of view, that also works kind of quite positively if we can see ourselves as part of the journey. So tapping into some of the things that you have pointed to. Peter, you've highlighted the collaboration across borders. Like one kind of thing of sharing is caring, I always say, kind of in colloquial terms, but sharing is caring. And the other thing is also which types. And I know that we shouldn't create silos. We're trying to break down some of the silos. Having said that, one of the silos that might be where we can open some floodgates is the knowledge about nature, the knowledge about the biomimicry. Going back to your questions in terms of, can we actually tap into some of the international knowledge about how the materials respond in different climates? That would be a good idea. And we know that we have researchers at our own universities and schools of architecture that are actually looking into that. So how to disseminate, how to share those types of practices. and then, of course, leading into some of your very, very, very salient points about legislation, can we accelerate the process in which one is allowed to use knowledge from another context? I'm looking at you guys as if, because I all think that you actually possess some of the answers. But you know the way in which that we always want to test, we've done it, thank God, in terms of in other situations, we know this with pharmaceuticals. But if you have a license to operate, is there one way in which we can accelerate and share that license to operate?
And I think you mentioned something super interesting, because COVID vaccines, it took a year worldwide. We can do it. We can do it. It's just a matter of that perhaps we don't have the right people.
Yes,
but we should be able to do that.
And as some person taught me only last week, sometimes it's also about techniques. Reimagining, re-identifying some of the old traditions of how to construct, how to build, praise and value and celebrate the value of what lies in our knowledge embedded in our hands, in other words. So that it's not, I know now we're talking about it because we want to create the movement and the awareness. But when weed or seaweed creates differently, how? Let the experts within that realm share and care so that we can accelerate it. Is that a way?
It's definitely a way. The thing I was saying, because the time is running out, I also have another issue that I just want shortly to bring up, because all this discussion we have here, I really hope that this new, what is called board, who is going to make the new, an example for, or a suggestion for the new Danish architecture policy. You know, in Denmark, our minister has said we're going to have a new policy, and actually the one you told about earlier, Lene Tranberg, is in four person in this panel, and they have to bring all these sources. I think we should challenge them. So now we know all these things. You cannot make an architecture policy that is the old way. You have to do it the new way. When I look at the board members, I'm a little bit afraid of thinking the old way, and there has been a lot of debate of that. But I think some of the new people, younger people, I don't think there was one young people in that panel, but that's another discussion. I think the challenge for these people are to make this new policy, because then we could have it in the legislation and we could go out worldwide and see, okay, Denmark, we are in forefront for this.
You agree?
Completely. Yeah? It's cool. Traditional business models, again, we're looking at.
Wonderful.
It may be a question, I'm not sure where I'm at, but you mentioned Architects Declare, and I've met with the Danish, the group who are kind of in their spare time actually dedicating it to organizing the Danish Architects Declare. But I've also had meetings with Michael Paulin from the UK, the founding group. And Architects Declare is a global movement where they've actually managed to set up, sharing meetings globally from different regions, but it's organized locally, right? So it's local architects, local problems, local knowledge sharing, which I think is really amazing that that's been achieved. But the potential of Architects Declare is so big, but it's just not being catalyzed.
More mandate.
More mandate. And I think, speaking to Michael, the London Architects Declare, the UK, they created so much knowledge, resources, like incredible research. If you go onto their website and look at what they've created, it's amazing. The Danish don't have that yet. Why the UK one failed was because the government wasn't ready. They're not listening. That's another discussion. But the Danish government, there's ears. There's a board being created for these new policies. So I think for the next 6 months, when you're talking about the UIA and how to create momentum and share, like for me, capitalizing on that network that's there, people are passionate. Maybe they don't have enough time to make it happen right now, but maybe
they're
with
too
help
busy
of
earning
others.
money. Yeah,
exactly. So there's a huge resource there that's not being used, and I think that's a good way to go forward for the next.
It's a lovely point.
Yeah.
Point. That's one more.
We'll
And you're not annoying.
No, not at all. Absolutely
You read my
not.
mind.
Welcome it. It's wonderful.
Might be.
So at the International Water Association conference that I was just at, I went to a committee meeting of people who are interested. How do we start enabling more sustainable solutions? They were exploring, and they didn't really have a roadmap. They didn't have any idea where to go with it. And it just brought to mind the legislative effort that I was a part of way back when. I don't know how politics work, but the reason that we ended up getting it passed was that there was a goal. There was a deadline where we had to make something happen, and we made it happen. Like COVID vaccines. If it has to happen, we can do it.
Yeah.
But we need to have that pressing urgency, which I don't understand why that hasn't filtered through yet. But we need
It's 40% of the CO2 emissions that come from buildings.
There's urgency.
That's quite an
There
urgency.
is urgency.
Yeah.
So I don't know if how do we set these goals that will push the action through, rather than just everybody saying we
And I
want
think
to do this.
I think it's a very good point, and I think the reduction roadmap was certainly also an effort to make it tangible and concrete. And the reason why that was needed was also, or their motivation to do that was exactly from the same point of departure as you're mentioning. And I wanted to tap into the regenerative because we want in the regenerative to add and be positive. So one thing is to reduce, and we have to, but it's also to actually take it to the next way of addressing things, of giving back or adding positive value.
And perhaps,
sorry, Peter.
No, and sorry, I've just interrupted. No.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. That's okay.
Perhaps it's also starting, in one place and not trying to make sort of a huge policy about, for instance, it could be something about buildings are stock. We do not tear down buildings the way we have tear down buildings before. But we have to use the building materials to build new from. The most CO2, or the buildings that spend the less CO2s are the buildings that are not being built. So we need to look at buildings as stock instead. We have to be. I think we have to be very concrete. Going back to the COVID vaccine, okay, how do we change this issue, and then we can build from that.
And the other thing is that the materials that we're gonna use for all these things, we have to find in the materials we already have used once. Urban mining should be the one and only way of getting new resources, and then if you don't have it, you have to wait that some buildings should be turned down. Then you can use the materials there. If you could use that. There was this some months ago that we are now having more buildings in kilos than nature is building itself.
Exactly.
So that's one of the sources. Very you really have to think about that. But there's also urban mining should be one of the goals of saying, okay, we're not going to use any more of the nature. We use that we already have used once.
I think you guys have done the impossible in an hour's time. You have actually highlighted and emphasized some of the current challenges, but you've also pointed to a way ahead. You're looking at me because you really want to say something.
I really want to say very shortly.
Just before I was going to give you a huge round of applause.
Because we have made the idea of this Regenerate Now together. And one of the things that Peter and I is doing together is to take actually architecture firms and other firms out to the forest to think another way around the bonfire. So that's why I've brought this little thing, because I know Pernilla is definitely not coming much out of the city. Oh, she's a city girl. So I have made this for her. It's
an invitation.
It's an invitation, but it's also the way you look at it. You don't know what it is. No. But this is what is it called? Strygstål in English? I don't know.
Fire starter.
Fire starter. But it's called Light My Fire. So that's for you. Thank you for inviting us.
What Nikolai doesn't know is that I've been horseback riding since I was 3, which we rarely do in the city. But you're right, I've never started my bonfire myself, so thank you very, very much, guys. I think you did the amazing. I think you are amazing. And I think they deserve a huge round of applause So please, because we'll follow the tradition of the debate, so the applause now. Peter and Nikolai, you're formidable. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
And as I say every time when I finished with a poem, and I will do this as well. Close your eyes. Based on your wonderful input today, I will send you all on your merry way towards the regenerative. It's the words by Stacy Cotter-Manier, and today it is a salutation to the sun. When you come out, everything takes on your golden light. Lit with warmth, the paint on the park bench glistens, beckoning me to join and inhale your goodness. The ground beneath my feet dries and shimmers with minerals as the damp autumn leaves retake their form. Peeling away from the soil beneath them, drying and insisting in another life beyond the tree. My hair turns to gold in your attendance. I catch it in the corner of my eye, blowing and lightening in remembrance to you. My body begins to warm, relaxing and releasing all the tension your absence brings. I profit from your presence with gratitude and a love knowing life without you can create. Thank you.